The first day I saw you since long ago, I still remember it was so cold. And you were warm and I with some green tea. You asked me, can you lend me sugar? You grabbed the chicken bowl and shook her. And you put all the sugar right on me. And what a crash, felt the sudden sugar rush as you sang.
Hello, good morning. So, today's a lovely Saturday morning, and it is a little chilly outside, but it's that perfect level of crisp where it's not cold, but it's not hot. It's just refreshing, if that makes any sense. Now, if you're new to this channel, or if you've seen any of my past videos, you know I'm already totally addicted to thin and light technology, whatever it might be. It could be some sort of tiny, dumb phone that I'm infatuated with, the iPad lineup. I love my iPad mini, the MacBook Air lineup. My iPhone 13 mini is still my main iPhone, going on for years at this point. So my infatuation with thin and light tech goes deep. Now, over the last week, I've been using this Windows laptop, which is, I think, my first high-spec Windows laptop that I've actually ever had. And the reason why I find this particularly interesting is because it's thin and light, but it's surprisingly powerful. Now, this is the new LG Gram Pro, and I'll just say it off the bat, this thing has some beastly specs considering its size, and I absolutely love it. Now, full disclosure, LG did send this my way, but this video isn't sponsored. They don't get to see this video before it goes live, and I'm sort of just talking about it the way I talk about tech in the everyday life and how I think it actually performs on the day-to-day. So naturally, I'm not going to go into benchmarks and stuff. That's not really something I'm into. Other people are better at that stuff anyways. What I will be talking about is the frames that I'm going to be getting in certain games, the way this thing actually handles video editing, and naturally all the everyday stuff that you might use an actual laptop for. So sorry if you're here for benchmarks, it's just not something that I'm good at. Now, for context and reference on how I'm approaching this thing, I'm a part-time content creator on this lovely YouTube. I'm a full-time accountant during the daytime. I am a newly recent anime nerd over the last year and a bit, and I'm a huge gamer. So a part of this is going to be a good chunk of gaming. So I'm pretty much going to be covering everything from gaming to media to editing, all the fun stuff you might want to do on a laptop day to day. Now, naturally, when it comes down to any sort of laptop, specs are a huge part of somebody's decision on whether or not a laptop is for them. And I will say this is very well spec'd, or so I think. I believe this is on the mid to high range in terms of laptop specifications. This one does have an Intel Ultra 9 285H, which is, I believe, their newer Arrow Lake lineup, if I'm not mistaken. So for processing power, I'll say off the bat, it's going to be up there in terms of performance, especially on a laptop. Now, the thing that got me here, considering the size of this laptop, this thing has a dedicated GPU, the RTX 5050 8GB. And it sort of surprised me in terms of its performance with and without DLLS. And just so I'm clear, I've spent a little bit of time playing some games on here, setting things up, making sure everything's working. And probably a bit of a spoiler is that the RTX 5050 was surprisingly excellent. My model particularly comes with 32 gigs of RAM and 1 terabyte of SSD storage. Now, there are different configurations of this. I believe it might come in an i7 variant, 512, 2 terabytes. Mine has 32 gigs of RAM and 1 terabyte of storage. But I will have a link down below. You do want to check out the different configurations of this system. Now, in the grand scheme of specs and stuff, how does this actually work? Well, I'm not really going to benchmark it because that's just not something I do. But I will sort of take you through how it actually functions between my games, video editing, and all that fun stuff like I mentioned. If you do want to bounce around this video, I will have timestamps below. Now, in terms of how this thing is actually put together and the ports that you get, flippin' excellent. Now, this thing has 2 USB-A Gen 3s, 3.2 USB-As, and right now I have a gaming mouse and my gaming keyboard plugged into it. I just sort of leave that there because why not? Apart from those 2 USB-As, you have on the left side a full-size HDMI 2.1 port, which is awesome to see on something this size. And then you have the 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, which is going to be great for any sort of, one cable connections, or for myself, I was using a dongle to transfer media onto the system. So that was pretty awesome. So yeah, Thunderbolt ports, huge plus. And I think I missed one. There's the headphone jack on this side. That's a 4-pole headphone jack, and that's going to be good for any sort of, IEMs. I love using my in-ear monitors and any sort of other headsets, headphones, whatever else you might want to use. Oh, hi. Hi, Lexi. Hello. Now, in terms of the actual build and design of this thing, again, insanely thin and light. I think this thing is like, I don't know, under 3 pounds, maybe just over 3 pounds. I'll have the actual weight and size of this thing up here, but again, insanely lightweight and super thin. Now, in terms of the actual size of this thing, this is actually the biggest laptop I've ever used in terms of the display size, but it sort of compensates in terms of the actual thinness and the weight of this thing. So yeah, I actually sort of dig the large screen lightweight combo of this thing. Likewise, this thing looks badass. This is all black. It's like a matte black finish. I really dig it. And it is an all metal body, so it actually feels pretty premium. There's not much flex to it that I can feel, at least. But yeah, in terms of build and design, it's kind of a premium build. The only sort of comment I have on the sort of build of this laptop would probably be the keyboard could be a little clickier. I think that might come down to more of a preference, but of course these are, like, you know, low profile chiclet style keys, which are fine. I would have just wanted them to be a little clickier. They can somewhat feel a little mushy at times. But yeah, 17-inch, super light, built well, premium. I really dig it. And naturally, one of the best things I love to test is the one finger lid lift, which this passes with flying colors. So no complaints about the actual build and design of this thing. But yeah, that's the brains, the power of this thing, how it actually feels, the ports and the specs. Now I'm probably gonna get into some, a little bit more gaming this afternoon because it's beautiful now, but it's actually gonna be raining a lot today. So I'm gonna be inside for the rest of the day likely. And I'm gonna show you guys what I get up to in terms of the gaming and the actual performance of this thing when I'm editing, because I learned DaVinci Resolve on this thing, so far at least. Anyways, I'll get into some gaming. I'll see you guys in a bit. Okay, so I spent a good amount of time gaming on this because I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge gamer. It's probably one of my favorite things to do to wind down at the end of a long day. As much as I love watching shows and all that stuff, gaming is typically my go-to when it comes down to decompressing. So naturally, I put this thing through its paces when it comes down to actually truly trying out gaming in its full capacity. And I can say I was actually pleasantly surprised. Now, this thing isn't even marketed to be a gaming laptop whatsoever. It's primarily marketed to sort of be kind of like, I don't know, like a MacBook Pro or something similar where it's a all-encompassing, light and powerful laptop sort of thing. That's how it's sort of presented, in my perspective at least. That being said, unlike a MacBook Pro, this thing actually games incredibly well. Now, the MacBook series, of course, is naturally super, I don't know, it is powerful, mind you, but it's Mac, so it's not really going to be having all the accessibility to the games that you might want similar to Windows. Now, I've got this laptop literally hooked up to my entire desk setup, and I've been gaming in my desk setup as I would a PC. The best part is that I can sort of disconnect this at any point in time and just play on the go. Now, I didn't test every single game ever, but I will go through some of the frames that I got on both my desk setup as well as natively on the laptop itself, since I know sometimes docks and connecting to different monitors might affect the performance of the actual machine. So I did both. Now, I played a good mix of games between, I don't know, I did Overwatch and Marvel Rivals, because those are my two go-to shooter games. One's a third person, one's a first person, and they both have sort of different graphical intensities, I guess. So I'll talk about how each of those performed. Likewise, I do like my open world games. So I did have a chance to jump into Cyberpunk, which is actually a really demanding title, but it's incredibly optimized. So that one probably surprised me the most. And naturally, Game Pass being Game Pass is probably one of the best values in gaming, plain and simple. That opens up the world of games to Windows machines, which is something I haven't had portably, I guess, in quite some time. If ever, really, if I think about it. So on Game Pass, I tried the new Tony Hawk 3 and 4. I'm a diehard Tony Hawk fan growing up. I played that game a ton, so it was a pleasure playing it on here, as well as Expedition 33, the Clair Obscura game. And I'm just at the beginning of that game, but it looks incredible, mind you. So I did test that. And then, of course, something a little less demanding, but still beautiful, if it makes sense, would be Baldur's Gate 3. Love that game. I think I've played through that game 3 or 4 times. And again, a bit surprised that the RTX 5050 did as well as it did, mainly because people online just seem to love to complain about the 5050. And I don't know why. Either I'm more of a normie now than I previously was in my earlier tech days, or it really is actually pretty decent for casual gaming. Now, in terms of what I set this to in terms of settings, most of my games I played on low to medium settings at either 1080p or 1440p. For myself particularly, just to let you guys know that I primarily chase the higher frame rates, especially because, again, I'll talk about the display more on this laptop, but this is a high refresh display, 144 hertz. So I like to chase the higher frames naturally. It's just what I prefer over fidelity of my games. So you can sort of play with your settings in between anything this laptop can offer between, you know, low, high, mid settings. You can have some sort of frame generation on. In my testing, I did a good chunk of both. So my first person shooter games and my third person shooters, I did those native. So there's no frame generation on there whatsoever. And then some of the other games like Tony Hawk's and Clair Obscura, I obviously had DLSS on there. Definitely Cyberpunk, that game is really demanding. and it did an excellent job. But between all of my testing, it is more than just capable of gaming. It's actually good at gaming, which was probably the biggest surprise coming out of this system. 8 gigs of VRAM goes a long way, I guess, if the machine itself is an absolute beast. So between the i9 and the 32 gigs of onboard RAM, it's done pretty good. Now, starting with, I guess, gaming in the desk setup, I wrote down all my frames here. Let me see what I got. Now, of course, when it comes down to the shooter games, I did not have any sort of frame generation because that does affect latency quite a bit when it comes down to games like that. And you sort of want the best reaction time. So I kept all resolutions native and I played at low, medium settings, and it did really well. Marvel Rivals, I had 100 to 120 FPS in my desk setup. And for Overwatch, I was hard locked 144 FPS while gaming in my desk setup. For both Marvel Rivals and Overwatch, I had actually better frames, not plugged into a monitor, which is why I think something in my setup is affecting that, whether it's, you know, pushing the actual display itself or the dock. I'm not sure which one it is, but I got better frames on the laptop itself. Marvel Rivals pushed 115 to 130 FPS, and Overwatch, again, that was a hard-locked 144 frames per second, so that was pretty good. Now, for myself, as somebody who was a previous top 500 competitor on Overwatch, I know my FPS games. I appreciate low latency, and performance is key when it comes down to shooter games like that, and it more than is definitely playable. I can say I had a better experience on the laptop itself, plain and simple, especially with that 17-inch display. It actually did pretty good. So that was surprising when it comes down to shooter games. Going into my 2 Steam games, so Baldur's Gate 3 and Cyberpunk. Baldur's Gate 3, I was in the desk setup hovering at about between 80 to 110 frames per second native. I don't even know if Baldur's Gate has frame gen options, but I didn't have it on there anyways. And on the laptop itself, again, it was about a 10 FPS boost. I was about 90 to 110 FPS through the laptop itself, which was great. Now, the one that actually surprised me the most, it was still on low settings, but Cyberpunk 2077 is one of those games where I don't know if it's just insanely optimized, but it actually looked really flipping good. And that was on the desk setup between 110 to 140 frames per second, again, with frame gen. And on the actual laptop itself, outside of the desk setup, I was hard locked 144 FPS. And that was with VSync and stuff syncing up to the laptop screen. So the 2 Steam games did extraordinarily in terms of frames per second. For my 2 Game Pass games, Tony Hawk and Expedition 33, those I did have frame gen enabled, which again, I'm pretty stoked is available on here. I'm guessing that's the RTX 5050, but they performed well. Again, similar to my other games, when I was plugged into my desk setup itself, my frames did hover a little bit less than on the laptop itself unplugged. But on Tony Hawk, I was hovering between 120 to 144 FPS. And Expedition 33 between 60 and 70 FPS. On the laptop itself, not in the desk setup, Tony Hawk, I was getting 120 to 144 FPS, so that actually didn't shift too much. And Expedition 33, I had 85 to 110 FPS. Again, all of these, it's going to be dependent on what you guys want to play, which is the cool part about it. That's one thing that I appreciate having a Windows system versus consoles. Again, I'm typically a console player more so. I do have my gaming PC, but I haven't really been too much into that. And for the most part, I would just play FPS games native. So frame gen, I can say, has come a long way, and I can appreciate that you can swap the settings between, you know, low, medium. If you want to play at 30, 45 FPS at 1440p medium settings, you can do that on this system, which is something that I definitely appreciate. So yeah, gaming was surprising when it comes down to this laptop, considering it's so thin and light. Again, it's not marketed as a gaming machine, but man, did it perform well as a gaming machine. And yeah, it's kind of wild how far technology has come. But yeah, that's it for today specifically. I think tomorrow I'm gonna get into some sort of editing a little bit further. I'm actually sort of editing this video as I go along because I'm learning DaVinci Resolve on this system completely. And I'm editing, again, this entire video on here. And so far, again, editing the earlier section of this video, it did surprisingly well. So yeah, I'll get a little bit more into the editing and I'll let you guys know how that goes. All right, so I sort of want to round out the rest of this video, sort of just talking about the rest of what I've sort of found with this laptop. And that's going to be, you know, the normal, I guess, laptop things that you're going to do every day. So normal browsing, watching media, the screen, microphone, camera. But primarily, I sort of want to start by just going over my experience editing on this thing and going back to how I think this thing is sort of marketed similar to something like a MacBook Pro it's right in line in terms of exactly that, because the editing performance on here was better than I thought, and that's with myself learning DaVinci Resolve as I go using this device. Now, as for my experience editing on here using Resolve, first off, I can see what the hell people are on about when they talk about Resolve, and I'm fully thinking about swapping to Resolve from Final Cut Pro. So first off, Resolve's awesome. And again, sort of giving this my full-hearted attempt at editing, I was just pleasantly surprised. And just so you guys know where I'm coming from in terms of how I edit my videos, I don't do anything crazy. Even through my typical videos that I'm editing on Mac, I don't do any crazy VFX or anything like that. I typically just have a couple layers of 4K footage and maybe music, some sound effects, so nothing crazy in the whole grand scheme of things. Now with that, for myself on here, I typically only had maybe 2-3 layers of 4K footage between A-roll and B-roll and stuff, and it handled that without any sort of issue. The only issue I had on this system was shooting 6.2K open gate with my Fuji camera, and just to get a little more technical here, 6.2K doesn't sound a whole lot bigger than 4K footage, but when you actually do the math on the pixels, which I'll sort of leave a little, I don't know, a little pop-up here showing the math behind the pixels, one layer of 6.2K open gate footage is more than 3 times that of 4K, just normally. So when I had one layer alone of open gate footage, the system did finally actually slow down a bit. So attempting to put another layer on top of that for like B-roll and stuff, it definitely slowed down quite a lot. So after editing the first third of this video, which I think was Friday night, I swapped to just shooting 4K instead of open gate, mainly because this was having dropped frames, and if I was to add another layer, it would have slowed down quite a bit. That said, again, if you are just shooting 4K footage, this flies through it. No issues whatsoever with 4K footage, and it works incredibly well. Now that said, in terms of performance, if I'm just going with my 4K footage, scrubbing through the timeline was no issues. So when I am chopping through my 4K footage, I actually edit at 2x speed, which is really flipping fast, and it still didn't drop frames on my normal 4K footage. So just something to be aware of about that. Now, I'm not gonna go into exports and all that because I think that's sort of irrelevant, because anything that you guys might consider on this laptop when it comes down to editing or whatever stuff, your project isn't gonna be the same as my project, but so far with mine, it's been perfectly fine. Now, outside of that, I do wanna talk about the display on this laptop more in depth, mainly because it's pretty much going to be one of the more important features of this system, mainly because when you're gaming, you want a really good screen. When you're editing, you're going to want a good screen. I will say this has a peak brightness of 400 nits, so it's going to be pretty much full SDR content. You're not really going to be doing any sort of HDR on the laptop itself. Again, yesterday when I threw this into my desk setup for editing as well as gaming, of course you can get HDR on other displays, so something to be mindful of if you are trying to edit HDR on the go. That said, the display does get plenty bright. I spent a good amount of time outside over this past weekend gaming and editing on my patio, and the display did get perfectly bright enough for myself outside, and it performed naturally well. Likewise, when it comes down to something like a laptop, it's going to be one of those things that you can definitely lean into when it comes down to actually enjoying yourself for any sort of media and content. So yeah, throughout the weekend, I found myself actually using this to watch media and content, particularly outside on my patio, again, just because of the portability. I will say when it comes down to the battery, the only time I found the battery really truly draining was when I was editing and gaming. Otherwise, when doing all the normal other stuff, like just watching media, browsing the web, going on YouTube and stuff, I was writing a little bit for this video, and the battery simply just goes. I could foresee this system being an all-day battery depending on what you're doing on it. That said, for myself particularly, with my use case, I typically always have a charger. Again, when I am gaming outside or in my desk setup, I'm gonna be plugged in. Otherwise, I did actually test to see what this charges at, and it was hovering between 90 and 93 watts. So I have this little fancy Anker charger. I'll have a little clip here of it charging, and this charged really quickly through the 90 watts. With that, because of the actual display on the laptop itself, I was sort of mentioning it when it came down to my frames when I was gaming. I found the gaming experience overall just better on the actual laptop itself. I think that might just come down to the native built-in display working better. I'm not quite sure. With that said, when it comes down to gaming on the screen itself, I know I spoke about when I was gaming, the frames I was getting, but from the display standpoint, it looked really flipping good. This does have a 144 hertz refresh rate, so it is going to be great for any sort of, first-person shooters or anything, or anybody who just likes gaming at a higher refresh rate like myself. And this does have a variable refresh rate, so there's no sort of issues when it comes down to screen tearing and all that stuff. And yeah, overall, when it comes down to gaming, at least, the screen did a great job. Likewise, media does look good. One thing I wasn't quite expecting on here were the speakers. This does have 4 5-watt speakers, which I only ever really put this thing to about 30 or 40%. Even outside, I didn't really put it too loud because it was simply loud enough at 30 or 40%. So you're really going to dig the speakers on here. For myself, at least, the speakers were just impressive considering the size of this thing. So yeah, just something I wasn't really expecting. And there's only a couple things I want to talk about is the camera on here. The camera is simply okay. It's going to do the job for any sort of Zoom calls and stuff. Other than that, I really have just appreciated having Windows Hello, where you can just log in with your face. I've always missed that. I don't know why Mac doesn't have that. Apart from that, the microphone's simply going to be okay as well. It's going to be good for any sort of, Zoom calls or whatever else. Or if you're getting any sort of referencing tracks, if you're throwing down some sort of instrumentals on guitar or whatever else it might be, it does an okay job. To round out my experience with this laptop, I sort of want to just talk about the highlights of what I loved about the system and the things that I didn't quite like about it. Starting with the things I love is the sheer power coming out of this system considering its size. Just going back to the beginning of this video, I absolutely love small tech that punches well above its weight class, and this easily fits into that. Between the gaming, the editing, the portability of it. Again, it is a bit large in terms of display size, but it sort of compensates for that with, I guess, the thinness and stature and the weight of this device. So I really, really love that particularly. Going back to the gaming and the creation aspect of my day-to-day, I love that this thing has an RTX 5050. They could have gone with something integrated, but the 5050, as much as people love to complain about it online, I don't quite understand the hate for the RTX 5050 as some people have, mainly because this dedicated GPU takes this from what could have been a mediocre system to an excellent system in my experience so far. Gaming and editing wouldn't be nearly as great as it has been on here if it wasn't for that 5050, so I really dig that. What I do wish there was maybe is that they had simply another option above this. If they had an option with a 5060 or a 5070, if that's even possible in this size, I actually don't know. Again, I'm a bit of a normie when it comes to laptop GPUs and stuff, but if that was an option, that would make for an incredible system. That said, the thing I love the most about this thing, apart from the portability, is that RTX 5050. Now, as for what I don't like about the system, there's only really going to be two, and that's going to be probably the keyboard to start with. Just feels a little bit mushy. I like more clickier, chiclet style keys versus this. It sort of feels, I wouldn't say it's mushy, but it's also not clicky. It's just sort of somewhere in between. That said, I still appreciate there being a numpad on this system. As somebody who's an accountant during the daytime, I like just having that option available to me. The second thing I don't really like about this display, and this is definitely going to be a me thing because again, I love my small tech, is I would have loved to see this thing in a 13 or 14 inch model. I don't know if that would have been possible because this does have a pretty solid cooling system inside. There are some fans that are going heavy sometimes when I'm gaming, depending on what I'm into. And I don't know if those fans would be possible to cool the 5050 in a smaller chassis. That said, I would have loved to see a 13 or 14 inch model on this display. But yeah, considering everything I talked about today, this laptop easily comes as a bit of a surprise. I haven't really used a Windows laptop with this much power in some time, and I'm certain there's going to be more powerful things out there with better GPUs. They might also be way larger than this laptop. But for myself, my use case, my workload, my gaming, my media, my editing, it does the job, and I'm just stoked that something like this even exists. But if you guys do want to check it out, I will have it down below. LG didn't sponsor this video, so my full experience with this is just everything that I get up to on the weekend between my gaming and editing, media, and all the fun stuff people do with laptops, I guess. I will have a link down below if you do want to check it out. And yeah, appreciate you guys hanging out. I'll see you in the next one.